The clock ticked slowly, its sound echoing in the empty office. Sarah sat at her desk, the only light coming from the flickering fluorescent bulbs above. She was used to the quiet. Late nights were part of her job as a graphic designer, but tonight felt different. There was an unsettling stillness in the air, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Sarah glanced at the clock. It was past midnight. She had promised herself she would finish this project before leaving. But now the words on the screen blurred together. She rubbed her eyes, trying to shake off the fatigue. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. She shivered, pulling her sweater tighter around her shoulders. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, plunging the room into darkness for a brief moment. Sarah's heart raced. She had heard stories about the old building, how it creaked and groaned, especially at night. But she had always dismissed them as mere superstition. Now she wasn't so sure. She took a deep breath and reached for her coffee mug, hoping the bitter taste would wake her up. As she brought it to her lips, she heard a sound. A soft rustling like paper being shuffled. It came from the supply room down the hall. Sarah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She told herself it was just her imagination, but the noise persisted. "Hello," she called out, her voice shaky. No response. She stood up, the chair scraping against the floor, and walked toward the supply room. With each step, the air felt heavier, the silence more oppressive. She reached for the doorknob, hesitating for a moment before pushing the door open. The room was dark, the only light coming from the hallway behind her. Shelves lined with boxes and supplies loomed in the shadows. "Is anyone there?" she asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. The rustling stopped. An eerie silence filled the space. Just as she was about to turn back, she noticed something on the floor, a crumpled piece of paper. She bent down to pick it up, her fingers trembling. It was a note hastily written in a scrawled handwriting. "The watching dot." A chill ran down her spine. She looked around the room, feeling a sudden urge to flee. But she forced herself to stay calm. Maybe it was just a prank. She pocketed the note, deciding to return to her desk. As she turned, she thought she heard a whisper, faint but clear. "Sarah." She spun around, heart racing. The room was empty. The shadows danced around her, and she could feel the weight of unseen eyes on her. She hurried back to her desk, her mind racing. "Get a grip," she muttered to herself. She sat back down, trying to focus on her work. But the unease settled in her stomach like a heavy stone. The clock continued its relentless ticking, each second stretching into eternity. Minutes turned into hours. The flickering lights above her seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. She glanced at the clock again. It was almost 2 a.m. Just a few more hours, she told herself. Just finish the project and then she could go home. But the whispers returned, echoing in her mind. "Sarah, come play with us." They were soft, almost childlike, sending shivers down her spine. She shook her head, trying to dismiss them. It had to be fatigue playing tricks on her. Suddenly, her computer screen went black. Panic surged through her as she frantically tapped the keyboard. "No, no, no," she cried out. The screen flickered back to life, but the program had crashed. She groaned, feeling a sense of dread wash over her. She had not saved her work in a while. As she tried to restart the program, she heard the rustling again. Louder this time, it was coming from the break room just a few steps away. She took a deep breath and stood up, feeling the weight of the darkness pressing against her. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. No answer. The rustling continued, a soft, persistent sound that pulled her toward the break room. Against her better judgment, she walked toward the door. The break room was dimly lit, the shadows deepening in the corners. She stepped inside, scanning the room. The coffee machine gurgled softly, but there was no one there. She felt a strange pull toward the fridge, as if something was calling her. As she approached, the rustling stopped. She opened the fridge door, the light flickering on. Inside, there was nothing but old takeout containers and a half-empty bottle of milk. Disappointed, she closed the door, but a strange feeling lingered. "Why am I even here?" she whispered to herself, feeling the weight of isolation settle heavily on her shoulders. She turned to leave when she noticed something on the table, a small, old-fashioned doll. Its glassy eyes seemed to follow her as she moved. Where did this come from? She wondered, picking it up. The doll was dusty and worn, its dress tattered. As she examined it, she felt a chill run down her spine. It was as if the doll had a presence, something dark and unsettling. Suddenly the lights flickered again, plunging the room into darkness. Sarah dropped the doll, her heart racing. "This isn't funny," she shouted, panic rising in her throat. The lights flickered back on, and she stumbled back, almost tripping over her own feet. The doll was gone. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked around the room, feeling the walls closing in on her. "Get out," a voice whispered, cold and clear. It sounded like a child echoing in her mind. She bolted from the break room, racing back to her desk, her heart pounding. She needed to finish her work and leave. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices filling her head. "Sarah, come play with us." Desperate, she focused on her screen, trying to ignore the noise. But the shadows began to shift, creeping closer. She glanced around, feeling the presence of something watching her. The air was thick with dread, and she could barely breathe. Suddenly, her computer screen flickered again and a new window opened. It was a video feed security footage from the building. Her heart raced as she recognized the break room, the very place she had just left. In the video, the doll sat on the table, perfectly still. But then, something shifted behind it. A shadowy figure appeared, a child with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. The figure reached for the doll, and Sarah gasped, stumbling back from her desk. "No, no, no," she cried, her mind racing. She tried to turn off the screen, but the video wouldn't close. The child in the video turned its head, looking directly at her, as if it could see her. "Sarah, come play with us." She felt a surge of terror. The whispers grew louder, drowning out her thoughts. She grabbed her phone, dialing the security number, but the call wouldn't go through. Panic set in as she realized she was completely alone. The lights flickered again and the shadows deepened. She could feel them closing in, pressing against her. "Get out," the voice screamed, now a chorus of children's laughter echoing in her ears. She leapt from her chair, racing toward the exit. The hallway stretched before her, dark and foreboding. As she ran, she could hear footsteps behind her. Echoing in the silence, She glanced back, but there was nothing there, only the shadows. "Help!" she screamed, her voice breaking. But the building swallowed her cries, leaving her in a suffocating silence. She reached the stairwell, throwing open the door and racing down the steps. Each landing felt like an eternity, the darkness closing in around her. Finally, she burst through the door to the ground floor. Gasping for breath, she fumbled for her keys, her hands shaking. She had to get out. As she reached the front door, she heard a soft giggle behind her. "Sarah, come play with us." She turned, heart pounding, but the lobby was empty. The shadows danced along the walls, twisting and turning. She threw open the door and stumbled into the night, the cool air hitting her like a wave. As she ran to her car, she glanced back at the building. The lights flickered one last time, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw the child's face in the window, grinning at her. She jumped into her car, locking the doors, and sped away. The whispers faded into the night, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Days passed, but the memory of that night haunted her. She couldn't return to the office, couldn't shake the feeling of those eyes on her. She quit her job, searching for a new beginning, a fresh start. But no matter where she went, the whispers followed. "Sarah, come play with us." And late at night, when the world was quiet, she could still hear the laughter echoing in her mind, a chilling reminder of what she had left behind.